This episode is brought to you by Allstate. Some people just know they could save hundreds on car insurance by checking Allstate first. Like you know to check the date of the big game first before you accidentally buy tickets on your 20th wedding anniversary and have to spend the next 20 years of your marriage making up for it. Yeah, checking first is smart. So check Allstate first for a quote that could save you hundreds. You're in good hands with Allstate. Savings vary. Terms apply. Allstate Fire and Casualty Insurance Company and affiliates. Northbrook, Illinois.
Your neighborhood just got cooler with Kroger Delivery's refrigerated trucks. Simply order groceries at the same great prices online as in-store, and we'll bring them to you fresh every time. And if that wasn't cool enough, you can now earn 4 times the fuel points after 4 with your digital coupon. Choose a next-day Kroger Delivery time slot for 4 p.m. or later on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. Must deliver by February 4th. Restrictions apply. See Kroger.com for details.
A little over a year ago, I met Caleb Corrill through the Coaching Coordinator podcast. He was fresh off his final season at Mount St. Joseph, where he did an amazing job putting together a high-powered offense. He progressed from being a 27-year-old figuring it out to a confident offensive coordinator. Hansen Ratings named him the D3 Offensive Coordinator of the Year, and over his 6 seasons as the offensive coordinator at Mount St. Joe, the Lions averaged 41.45 points per game and just over 460 yards per contest. The offense shattered the record books at the Mount while he was in charge, and that led to his opportunity at FCS St. Thomas in Minnesota. What I enjoyed most about Caleb was his approach to learning the game. He was willing to talk to anyone at any level to learn. This characteristic led to the idea behind this new series, Student of the Game. Caleb will be with us throughout the offseason. His first 6 episodes of the series are focused on learning, researching, and developing at this time of the year. I know you'll enjoy his guests and the growth mindset that will permeate this series. Thank you to Caleb for the time and detail he is putting into this. He's even thoughtfully selected the music for this episode, which he told me, quote, is my vibe. So hang loose and learn some ball. Here's the first episode of Student of the Game.
Student of the Game comes from the mindset that decrees we will be genuinely curious, constantly evolving, and obsessed with the process of learning and growing. I've often operated with the mindset that the game of football is constantly evolving, and we will either grow with it or become extinct. It is our expectation that we separate from those we have passed and to catch those that are still operating above us. This podcast offers a source for those that believe in constant evolution of their knowledge, individual craft, and overall intrigue in the game of football. I hope each of you can find one tool that can help improve your off-season process as you continuously become students of the game.
We have that saying where you're constantly trying to evolve and you're constantly trying to stay above guys without being caught, right? And I think even if it's just made up in your head, like you're trying to stay ahead of people. It's kind of extreme, but we say all the time, text each other, evolve or die. We're trying to evolve.
Coaches, welcome into the first episode of the Student of the Game podcast brought to you by the Coaching Coordinator series here. I want to give a thanks to Keith Grabowski for the opportunity to host this. On the first episode here, we have a special guest. It is the guy that sat next to me for about 5 years at the desk directly next to me at Mount St. Joseph University. He's the wide receivers coach and recruiting coordinator at the Mount St. Joseph University. Lane Little.
This episode is brought to you by Amazon. Sometimes the most painful part of getting sick is the getting better part. Waiting on hold for an appointment, sitting in crowded waiting rooms, standing in line at the pharmacy, that's painful. Amazon One Medical and Amazon Pharmacy remove those painful parts of getting better with things like 24/7 virtual visits and prescriptions delivered to your door. Thanks to Amazon Pharmacy and Amazon One Medical, healthcare just got less painful.
Thanks for joining the show.
Yeah, appreciate it. It's an honor. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So obviously we go way back, and I think that the essence of what we're trying to get done on this podcast is not only the ways that coaches can evolve their game and continuously learn, but how they go about that in the implementation they have from taking ideas that they see in a variety of areas and applying it. And I think that what we did at the Mount and what you guys are going to continue to do this year is a great example of that. So as we kind of jump in, I think your story is really cool. I got to witness it firsthand, but I want you to outline for the listeners just your kind of journey as you went along, starting with us at the Mount and working your way to a full-time position where you're at now.
Yeah, so 2019, I was looking for a capstone internship in my senior year of college. I went to University of Cincinnati and ended up joining the staff in 2019 as an intern. I think it was recruiting and operations or something like that is when it first started. One of the key things early on that I heard and that you told me right away is like, as much as you want to be involved, right? And I kind of just took that and, took that as I would. And I was with the offensive side from early get-go and just kind of just did as much as I could. So I took that and I was like, all right, if that's the case, I'll be at every meeting that I can be, every practice, every walkthrough. That was still when we practiced at night. So we had those late film sessions as a staff. And I remember one of our O-line coaches at the time was like, what are you doing here? So I was like, I'm just trying to be a fly on the wall and gain as much information as I can. And the role kind of expanded throughout that season where it kind of served as like a GA type thing for the most part, where I helped you a lot with the quarterback stuff and Coach Coop with the receivers and during practice and drill setup and takedown and things like that. And then that kind of expanded to running the scout team defense. And I think that was key early on of just being involved from the other perspective of it, being with the defense and communicating with college guys for the first time. And so that's kind of how my role expanded throughout that season. And then once that was over, I graduated in 2019. So I still had a semester on a lease still. And you were like, what's your plan going forward? And it's like, I don't really have one right now. So you guys are trying to get me some different GA stuff. And so I applied for a couple things, nothing really stuck. And you're like, why don't you just ask Hop what's going on over here? We have an open stipend, see what's happening. You can just kind of help out in the spring. So I did that and they hired me on in January 2020. And that was cool for a couple months. And then everything shut down pretty soon after that. So then we kind of just jumped right into like that fall. We were just getting into pods and things of that nature. We can only have 10 to 15 guys coaching. So I was the tight ends coach officially like during that fall 2020. So just jump right into that. And I think that was instrumental in my growth of learning our system, but also gaining my coaching voice during that time of coaching 10 to 15 guys and coaching tight ends. But we were also just coaching ball. Like we were coaching receivers, running backs, quarterbacks, like we were just doing it. So that was key, I think, in my growth as a coach as well. And then the recruiting aspect, just jumping right into recruiting as soon as I got hired on staff and getting a couple recruits right away, just kind of solidify that I could do it. And I remember you telling me early on, like, if you want to be a part of this whole coaching in college, like you got to be able to recruit. So I just took that and ran with it. And that fall season was finishing up my master's and was still a tight ends coach. Situations that arose where like receiver opportunity opened up, didn't really jump right into that because I was finishing up my master's, but things shook out a way where I could add some value to the receiver room and coach receivers and tight ends a little bit. After that season, 22 was running backs and operations and jumped at the opportunity to be the running backs coach as quickly as I could. It was key in my growth to be involved in the run game, but as well as the pass game as well, being able to sit beside you for as long as I have. So I felt good about the pass game, and then just being able to be a part of the run game was key in my growth for sure. But what's also nice that year is that we had a new special teams idea where we were going to have coaches be involved with different aspects of special teams. And Hop's idea was I was going to be a part of the punt return unit and install and game plan for the punt return team. So branching out into that, scouting and install. And that was my first year really doing that. So just jumping into any sort of special team stuff that I could to gain ground and gain knowledge on something else outside of just offensive football was key. And then this past season, a couple different opportunities arose, but I knew what we had coming back and what we were trying to chase and what we were striving for. And he offered me to be the co-special teams coordinator this past season. And that was something I jumped right into just because I felt good about where I was knowledge-wise within our offensive system and felt like I could wear those two hats and be involved in both things. And I think that's been something that I took away from this whole process. And whenever something is presented to you, just jump right into it as much as you could. And that led to staff stuff shaking out after the season and then jumping right into this past spring with recruiting coordinator and receiver. So it's been a great journey so far. Obviously, it's still early on. Got a lot of stuff to happen, a lot of things to keep going with, and we'll see how it kind of shakes out going forward.
and obviously getting to be there firsthand and watching your development. We're going to cover the ways that you did develop through it, which is why I've got you on here, because I've been so impressed with that. I know you won't admit this, but my favorite story about you is we basically had to coax you into being a college coach, and every offseason that you would elevate yourself with your performance and application and knowledge of the game and the way you could just handle all these different situations. It was always the kind of the inside joke of like, hey, you didn't even want to do this at first. Now this is what you do for a living. So I just think that's super cool. I knew it was a bittersweet to not be able to coach together this year, but I did know that it was going to allow you to elevate to where you deserve to be. And so just seeing that firsthand, and I think it's a cool story for guys that are either half in, they're not sure that, or they want to be in it. And you started as a college student, you know what I mean? Like you worked 700 hours, something ridiculous, for free. And I know I tried to paint the picture as you were coming up, and you didn't know at the time that this is what you were going to do, but the testament to you is whatever duty that you've been involved with, you've not only done that task, but you've been able to apply yourself in other areas. And I just remember always trying to give the guidance. I started as a coach that made $0. So just seeing that, obviously you're your own dude and you have you're going to make your own way in this, but I just saw a lot of myself and how willing you were to invest yourself into it, but then the competitive spirit that you and I feed off each other with. So obviously, you know how impressed I am by that, but I want other people to be able to hear that. So something I think is unique is, okay, as you're going through this, it was very clear early on, you played quarterback in high school, you had a great football mind. How were you able to combine your thirst for knowledge, which really applied itself in that quarterback, receiver, pass game realm, but also being able to apply it to different job duties that you had in that running back realm, the tight end realm, because you already mentioned it, and I think the way we allowed people to coach multiple positions played into it. But how did you tie those two things together where maybe you didn't start in the position group that hey, I want to be this position coach, but you continued to learn and gain and grow from that? So can you just talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's a constant balance, right, of expanding your knowledge in the room that you're in, but also trying to expand once you feel confident and you but get close to mastering in that room to expanding outside of that realm. And I think kind of like you were saying, you can always be thinking you should be somewhere else than where you are. And I think I'm a firm believer in you got to be where your feet are at the moment you're at, right? And I think a lot of times people can get into the mindset of trying to chase different titles, chase different things. But as long as you master what you're good at and master where you're supposed to be, a lot of things will shake out for you. So I think it's a constant balance of both those things. Whereas I can show that I can do this, so I get more opportunities because I'm able to do what I'm doing currently at a high level. That expanded into more opportunities that way. And kind of going back to what you're saying before of not knowing if this is what you want to do exactly for some guys. And it's for me, it's easy to say, but my goal all the time is to treat this and work at this like it's a full-time job, even if it's not. And so I try to attack that every day as much as I could and work like I was. So when I got that opportunity, I was ready for it.
Yeah, I can back that up. I love how Coach Hop, and you would attest to this, Coach Hop would always say, if you prove yourself at a lower level or, less responsibility, that's what's going to elevate you when something does open. And I always really appreciated that insight because, like you said, there's people that want something and say, hey, I can do that, but they're not doing the job that they currently have at a high level. And Coach Hop would always say, why would I trust you with more if you're doing less at the opportunity you already have? And I thought that just the way that you navigated that, again, it reminded me, I think that what you have is you have a foresight to where, and we're going to kind of dive into the mechanisms you use, but you are always studying something. And I think the longer you were around and the more you saw, okay, this is what Coach Corrill might be interested in, I'm going to study that. But you always had some avenue of study that you were doing on your own, which I think is the essence of this entire podcast of continuously being a student of the game. So when you think about it, and I've got to witness a lot of these, you have a great rounded approach to this. What mediums will you use in a given offseason to help gain further perspective and knowledge?
Yeah, I mean, I think early on, a big one was attending clinics, getting out to those right away. So Glazier clinics, other clinics around the area, getting to hear from college coaches, high school coaches, no matter who it was, just gaining as much knowledge and taking in as much as I could was good early on. And there's a ton of mediums out there like Coach Tube and just any kind of those mediums. Podcasts are huge nowadays too, of just listening to different kind of podcasts and just guys talking about scheme, talking about concepts, offense, defense, and just culture has been big. Twitter, Instagram has been good to us over the last couple of years, just finding little tidbits on there, bookmarking those and saving those. But I think a big one has just been YouTube. There's a ton of content out there of old coaching clinics, all 22 film. But a big one, I have to give a shout out to Coach Mike Minucci. We had him on a Zoom way back in the day. He started posting cut-ups of like all wide receiver targets in the NFL. Me and you sat here and watched Hunter Renfrow and Cooper Kupp targets and cut that up for weeks straight. And that's kind of where we got a lot of our stuff from, and kind of picture our guys in those systems. We do a lot of those same things. So YouTube's been good in that aspect. And then here recently getting this from a lot of guys as well as just Zooming, just talking ball with guys. And it's been a great avenue for expanding my knowledge and my growth, but also networking has been great as well. So I think those are like the big ones, YouTube and Zooming with guys and just talking ball has been big.
Yeah, and I think that if I were to give credit to what we were doing and what you guys are doing at the Mount, is we were very resourceful in the way that we would hunt down knowledge. Like, I think that story of watching Mike Vanucci's cut-ups is like, that's literally how we developed a lot of the system. Is just nobody taught us it, nobody clinicked us on it, but we had like this desire to know more and what else is out there. And I thought that that's what we did so well in not only individual development, but just the system development. Is you were downloading that information, and I might be watching a Keenan Allen cut, and I go, hey, did you see this from at 1:30 in the Keenan Allen? You go, yeah, okay, they did this with the Hunter Renfrow and the Raiders. And then as we do that, we went to Notre Dame and Western Michigan. You went to West Virginia, and you came back from West Virginia with this FIB concept. And it was just a continuous growth of added ideas. And I think that when we get into it, I think what's going to be huge is how you apply that to what you're doing, because you're always growing as much as you can, but applying it to what you're doing. But I think this is an interesting one that we did a really good job. And I think that over the last 2 to 3 years, you've become increasingly more impressive with, is as you approach an off season, after your season's completed and you do your self-scout, how do you use that self-scout to drive your off-season research?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's similar in a lot of ways to what a lot of guys do. But for us and for me, like, I'd like to look at like, what are our base concepts and how effective and efficient were those concepts, right? And if they were effective and efficient, then we can move on to the next stage of research and different ways that we can run that concept and keep it in our system. And I think that's what I do and then what you do as well. And we do it differently. Everyone does it a little bit differently, but just trying to find different ways where we can run those same plays and still stay efficient and effective with it, and kind of graduate our guys to that where they can understand it and master it as well. But also, like, if it's not efficient and it's not effective, like, not getting away and getting discouraged from that concept. And if you feel confident about it, diving back into it, stripping it down to the very beginning of what it is, relearning it to be able to reteach it to guys that master it. And I think seeing it from your perspective, like in 21, trying to run like the deep choice stuff, like, you felt very confident about it. And then we weren't great at it. Like, it wasn't a great concept. We kind of overtaught it. It was a whole thing. But seeing from from a different perspective, watching you go back in, like, hey, I'm going to relearn this thing, get it all the way down, strip it down, and then reteach it because you felt confident about it, just kind of showed for me, that's how the mentality is that I want to go with it as well, of like, hey, don't get discouraged. Let's relearn this thing. That way we can reteach it. And it's been a huge aspect in why I've been so successful over the last 2 seasons. It's because we didn't get discouraged with it.
That's an elite point right there. I mean, that's literally how we did it. And something I think is unique for people to hear, and I'm sure a lot of people have these ideas, but something I really like that you were doing this off season, and it started before I left, and I know it continued on and you used it through spring ball, but can you just kind of outline what you're doing with going back and watching all of the reps of what was our backup quarterback, who will be the Mount St. Joe starting quarterback going into this season, and what you were doing with that film? I thought that was a fantastic use of your time and application.
Yeah, I mean, we were fortunate enough where he got a lot of reps, right? He got over 150 snaps last year, and just wanted to go back, and when he's in the game, we're running a lot of our base stuff. We're not changing anything. We're not just running the football, but just kind of seeing what he was good at and seeing what he was efficient at, and just kind of get a good vibe on what he was comfortable with, and knowing that it's going to change a little bit based off having a 4-year starter type guy, and just wanted to be prepared and see what he was comfortable with. And that's led to different avenues of different ways we're going to teach some RPO concept stuff this year, and then some of our progression stuff as well. So a lot of this offseason has been tailored around losing the quarterback and then having some other guys where we're going to have to be able to teach things differently and see what they're comfortable with too. So that was the whole mindset about that, as well as just kind of relearning it and kind of reteaching it myself.
Yeah, I think that was I saw you starting your work on that, and then to seeing the progressions you guys are making, and obviously it might be a tick below what it was when we were working together, but I think like the way that multiple guys on our staff were included in this, but the way that you and I will continuously kick ideas back and forth to each other. I know I had a couple game planning situations at the new place, and I'd say, hey, what do you see in this? What are you looking at this? And I think that was another little way that we still do it in different situations now, where it's a continuous dialogue where it never shuts down, it never stops. And that's why I think that what we've done, what you guys are doing, and what we'll continue to do in the future is there's a constant evolution occurring. But as you said, it's formed around base concepts that we truly believe in, that we have work in. And I think I give you credit too I remember doing our postseason breakdown this past season and looking at choice, and it was the deep choice stuff was the best it had been for us. We were really good at it. And I just remember looking at you after you watched the cuts, and I said, is there more squeeze in it? And you said, there's more squeeze in it, right? And that kind of leads me into something that I think I witnessed firsthand, and I don't think I realized how elite it was until I stepped out of it. But that idea of how you're tailoring this work you're doing, you're studying, you're watching yourself, you're watching other people, but then you implemented specific drills to really hammer down the point. And I know that sounds basic, but I've never seen other people do these drills the way that we do them when it comes to the option and the goof and the choice. So just kind of that idea of how you really landed on that and how you created that into your own thing, to where it takes an idea and part of the implementation and application of what's happened on Saturday.
Yeah, for sure. And a big part of it is, like you said, tailoring those new ideas based off of troubling looks that we get is a big one, and how teams mash out some of our base concepts, and how can we engage the players as well as the quarterback and give them these looks in practice that mimic what it's going to look like in a game, rather than just doing routes on air with those same concepts, right? And that's kind of where my mind went throughout this whole process with these different drills. I was watching spring ball stuff, but I was watching Clemson's quarterback coach talk at a Glazier clinic, and he was showing like his front side of a smash progression that they were doing with just a corner, right? And then that's kind of what sparked my mind with this option drill, this goof drill, and this choice drill stuff that we've kind of implemented this spring and over the years as well. Is like, how can we make this for the quarterback? We always do drills where they have to process. Like, let's do more of these drills where we can process and show them these looks of different looks and what gives us trouble, but also that way they can, progress through the whole thing. So the choice one was big for us. And, we used to do the choice with the corner and just the corner and the right receiver shutting it down or taking it over the top. And this spring kind of implemented adding 3 coaches out there of boundary safety, field safety, as well as an alley player of, hey, the biggest thing was when I said we need more juice to squeeze out of this concept was, I just felt like when we're losing the quarterback, we need to be able to progress through the choice stuff better, and we got to be able to get to the check down stuff, because the guy we had before was a pretty talented athlete and could run the ball pretty well and get us out of some stuff. So getting the ball in other guys' hands. So just trying to get them different looks of, hey, if the boundary safety gets over top of that one choice, you got to get back quick to that field side and be able to work it. And if they match it all out, know where your check down is and be able to work that. So that was kind of the big aspect in wanting to change for the choice stuff, was just trying to get through the progression quicker, but also making the quarterback process is what was big. And that was what the option drill was, and it's evolved to we used to just do receiver, no defensive guy, just receiver quarterback, just working option stuff. And that evolved to getting a coach there and then seeing what Coach Thompson was doing to us in practice. And he was the most annoying guy to run option against, and what kind of things was his linebackers doing, and then do those to the guys in the option drill. That way they can be ready when those looks come in practice and in games. And then that evolved to adding a Mike backer. That way the quarterback's having to process and read the whole thing out, rather than going just through the process of not great footwork, not great timing, and like having to read the whole process out. So putting the receiver to the stick window side, having the guy run the option, and have it be a full progression for the guys to make it easier for them.
Yeah, and I mean, some of those additions you made this postseason, I go back and watch those cuts, and the subtle evolutions that continue to build out those drills are what I'm most impressed by. I love the mic ad and the stick option presentation. I think that's fantastic. I loved it last year when we would do option and we started to give them that low wall and different, techniques. But then you're still young enough, you're getting older now, but you're still young enough where you can guard them. It's like after we warmed them up, it's like, hey, I'm going to guard you. If you do that, I'm guarding you. And if I can guard you, well, certainly we're going to get matched up. So I thought that was great. And then I loved the deep choice drill, going back and watching it, because I still watch our cuts pretty frequently. And I still see, we had an All-American quarterback, should have been if he wasn't, right? That the times that we didn't complete it to the field, in my head as a play caller, you're on the field and things going crazy. It's like, I was guarded, and you look and it's like, no, he wasn't. We just didn't over there. So finding that application of the progression to me is an elite detail that will certainly serve you guys well. And I think that if you think about if we had that drill 3 years ago, the progressions we could have made on some of those concepts, I think it'll show this year for sure. And it'll show with a guy who does have experience, but he'll be in his first time role of being the guy. This question got asked to me, and I know you were the right-hand man along the way, and now you elevated your role. But somebody asked me, what percentage of your system do you evolve on a yearly basis? So I think that's a unique question that you have a few different perspectives of. And more importantly, in your role, what's the approach as a non-coordinator that you use to implement ideas that you find maybe on your own? So you're trying to pass these up. Luckily enough, Coach Hughes and myself, I feel like we're very collaborative, but you know how it is. You don't get the final say. So for those guys that are trying to add those, can you just give us some insight into that process?
Yeah. So first, I think it all depends, but I think that we're always 100% of the time trying to evolve what we're doing. We have that saying where you're constantly trying to evolve and you're constantly trying to stay above guys without being caught, right? And I think even if it's just made up in your head, you're trying to stay ahead of people, right? So it's kind of extreme, but we say all the time, text each other, evolve or die, right? We're trying to evolve. And I think if everyone's trying to evolve 100% of what they do, you may not always get there, which is all right. And I think this past season was a great example of, we had a ton of guys returning. We evolved a lot of different things from our base stuff and implemented that first with some of our FIB stuff and motion stuff. And then we kind of graduated and sprinkled stuff in throughout the season, which is kind of got us to that 100% evolution that we were looking for. So I think that's a fine line and fine balance between that, where you're not going to get it all in at once, but you can get it on the docket and ready to put in. So I think that's been good for us from that way. So I think we're just constantly just trying to tweak as much as we can without making it too much for those guys. And then that second question that you're talking about, trying to get what you found and implement those ideas that you found. A big part of it is based off past relationship. It's based off of building that trust and connection, just like you do with players to coach, but also coach to coach. It's not going to be something that happens right away, right? That's the kind of stuff that goes on season to season with different suggestions, in-game stuff hey, I need something, right? And saying it with the conviction and saying it with something, and stuff ends up working out. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't, but not being afraid from those moments later on too. So for me, I think that's what's been key is building that relationship through that time, having knowledge of the system. But I know for me, especially now when I want to go to you or to Coach Hughes or anybody with something, knowing how it affects the whole system rather than just this one-off specialty type play. That's going to be great. Those are for red zone special team, special stuff. But for me, be prepared to systemize this new idea where, hey, how does this tie into our run game? How does this tie into our pass game, right? Because I know the first thing that would come to you if it was something about the new run game play, it's how can we tie this into the pass game, right? How can we tie this into the run game? So that's a big part of it as well. It's always does this fit into what we can do? And then can we expand off of that? So I think that's been big. This offseason, I've been looking at one of our base day one install plays and just trying to find different ways to run it. It felt like we can expand the ways we can run it. And we've talked about that. But also now my goal is to try to figure out how we can run our base run plays out of those same looks too, to protect the whole system. So just coming to the coordinator and knowing what we know, but also being ready to have the answers for when you ask the inevitable questions of how it's going to tie into the other parts of the game as well.
That's a fantastic answer, because I think that's something, and obviously I've personally got a new role where the greater good of the overall system is always going to have more value than a singular play. And I think that's where, like you said, we have the relationship of being able to build off of base plays. And I think that you grew in that area exponentially from year to where, like you said, it systemized the idea. And I think that's the notion that guys in your position or guys in my position in newer roles, it's like, taking it, systemizing the idea, because the people that we love to study, I mean, it's always plays on plays, right? It's the things that they've done in some of our favorite NFL watches. It's all built off of the same idea. And so I think that's a fantastic way to look at it. And speaking of that, we have some similar influences and people we like to watch, but also some different ones. When you look at it in an off season, and every off season is different, but how much would you say, or how would you kind of describe how much you study the system that you're part of, the system that we've built there versus watching others? And in that process, what are you looking for when you watch somebody else? Are you looking at everything that they do? You're looking at a specific idea. How does that process work in your mind?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that I could probably study what we do just a little bit more. I'd say it's probably 60-40 of watching others. Here recently, it's been watching the Rams and the Lions a lot this offseason, of watching their condensed stuff and watching things like that. And that ties directly into what we do. We do a lot of that condensed formation stuff. And how can that tie in? And how many different ways do they run things so we can tie it into what we do? And then watching this offseason has been big on watching some Washington and Texas stuff as well, just different shifts and motions and some of that pro style stuff as well. So I think it's a fine balance of watching our own stuff. I usually like to watch it early on in the off season, and then later once we start getting closer to camp as well. So that's kind of the process that I go through in that. Is I usually try to watch just full team stuff, hear from other people and who they're watching. And maybe we do take something, maybe we don't, but just go into it with an open mind and see if we can kind of implement it into what we do.
Yeah, I think that something that we did really well was, and I think that to me is the essence of this, is obviously we study ourselves pretty thoroughly. I think we do a really good job especially like in training camp and spring ball, when it's just cuts on cuts of these concepts of really dialing it into what we need it to become. But where I think that we have a really cool balance is, as I'm similar to you, is even if, like you said, you watch Washington, Texas, and are we going to implement all of what they do? No, but you're taking a stylistic, offensive approach that has some similarities to what we do, watching their full deal and understanding what they're trying to accomplish. And I think that goes back to systemizing your idea. Is there's always going to be anecdotal ideas that we see on Twitter. We see pop up, Dan Casey post one, pace and space, but whatever it is, right? But then understanding, okay, I saw this idea. This reminds me of something we already do. We can implement it like this, and it can be built off that. Because I remember, I think it was before I left this offseason, I forget exactly the idea, but I was sitting on that whiteboard to your right now for a while, where it was like a motion sequence that built off of like a run, right? An inside run, an outside run, a play action, a double move, something like that, right? RPO probably was in there. And it was just something that we saw and was like, hey, we want to do this. How can we series this play out? So I think that that's a great approach to being able to do that. And then you kind of touched on it, but I think it's the key deal in all of this is, how do you, from the experience you have, how do you know where to draw that line of what's too much and walk in that appropriate amount of like implementation versus, okay, like let's pocket that idea. It could come up at different times. How do you process that?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of piggybacking off of what we've learned from you and what we learned from other people too, and how we've kind of expanded our system. But I talk about all the time with guys being masters of our system, right? And I think that's the fine line. If like once it starts becoming something that they're not completely mastered in, or if it's something that they're not bought in with, I think that's where the fine line comes into of, what we can install, what we can add. Because all these concepts and stuff are great, but if these guys aren't bought into it, and if these guys don't master it, know it from everybody, what everyone's supposed to be doing from all skill positions to even in the run game, what we're trying to get done, then it's not worth the squeeze, right? And maybe it gets put on the back burner for when we can graduate to that like we did this past year. So it's definitely a fine line of you want to get some of this stuff in, but it's also you want to make sure that these guys are fully engaged and fully bought into what we're doing, right? Because it's easy to get through to outthink the room, and it's easy to be the guy with all the smart ideas, but if it's not everyone's bought in with it, then it's not going to be something where it's going to be effective. So
we've been together, been a part of high-level operations and probably mid-level operations, right? And that's where it all comes down to. And I think the thing I have to convince people of is this system that we've built together is that we really don't run that many plays. Like,
no, we don't.
The concepts there's not that many, and you have to kind of prove it to people that are really investigating what we do. But I kind of have formulated this idea of just less plays, more ways.
Yep.
And I think that really applies into how we've studied it through the years, the way we've implemented it, and honestly, like the things I'm crediting you for, how we've taught it, right? And we had to learn that because we've had these ideas for half a decade. But like you said, we've run these concepts and they stunk before, and we've run these concepts and they've won on 3rd and 4th downs in big time games, right? So kudos to that. And like, obviously you and I have done this conversation 100 times, but you hear it from me all the time, and now getting the opportunity to kind of put it on the airwaves, the way that you've navigated this profession and the difficulty of it, and talking about in the background, like, you had to work through 5 years of non-full-time positions, right, to be in the spot you're in. So what I want to make sure is put out there as we close this out is your persistence, your attention to detail. There's obviously, we talk about a passion for the game. There's a passion for people that you possess, your willingness to learn and apply and adapt. And I think where I've seen you grow tremendously is in, like you said, the process, the systemization, and not getting bummed out when we're really excited about an idea and it doesn't work. It's like, hey, we need to tweak it, right? And I think that's where you and I have grown together, is understanding what we're trying to accomplish, understanding how to coach it, and then, as you said, getting ultimate buy-in where I always tell people outside of our staff, if you called anybody on the Mount St. Joe staff, you call any of the kids that are playing there this year that are all stepping up in new roles and say, hey, break down zag option versus 4-2-5 right now. What's the read? What's the process? What's the technique? Every single buddy in that room would be able to do that, right? And that's what you want to get to. So just know, I think you do know, but how proud I am of you, of the development. The role you're in has been a long time coming. And as we often talk about, we each have our own tasks ahead of this year, but what's coming in the future, man, for you and the way that you've developed in a short amount of time is incredible, and super, super honored and blessed to be able to see that happen. So you know that, how proud I am of you, and I appreciate you coming on here. Is there anything else, like, okay, let's say we'll end it with this, got a minute or two. You're talking to first year, not the college graduation hours year, but the first year Lane Little in coaching. Is there one thing that you would go back and say to a young guy that now becomes the advice you're giving to new young guys on the staff?
Yeah, man, that's a great question. I think one of the big things is, I said it before and I'll say it again, like, train yourself and work as if you're in the role that you want to be in, right? And then it's easier for some guys. Some guys got to work a little bit on the side. Some guys don't have housing options and things like that presented to themselves. But be ready to adapt and be ready to just work, right? It's all about the process of working, and stay to that. And don't get discouraged. There's going to be ups, there's going to be downs, but just treat that like it's a full-time job, even when it's not. And like I said, it's easy to do that, but if this is what you want to do, get into it, get into the weeds, and be ready to attack it. And a lot of the guys I talk to nowadays too, be ready to be willing to recruit, be ready to adapt and do things that you're not comfortable with, and be fine with that. Be okay with being uncomfortable and doing things that you might not fully be ready for. And then you'll see the success and see things work out for you in the future. So I think that'd be one of the big things.
It's great, man. Well, you've done just that. So everything you're preaching, you've lived, and you continue to live it. And the upside that you have within you and what you're doing is tremendous. Obviously, I think the world of you. Can't wait to work together again. But I appreciate you coming on here in this first episode that Keith gave me the opportunity to do, and look forward to our next Chalk Talk.
For sure. Definitely appreciate it. It's an honor. Thank you, guys. I appreciate it.
Thank you again for listening to the Coach and Coordinator podcast. As you've noticed, we now have a series of podcasts on the Coach and Coordinator Network. We're really excited about this series approach and what each different host brings to us. Plus, we have some roundtables, which essentially are hostless podcasts, starting with Think Tank, which will begin next week. We recorded that first Think Tank with Dan Gonzalez, Dub Maddox, and Josh Herring, and I'll tell you, it was so detailed and so good in what they put into it. I know you're going to enjoy that series as well as all the other series we have on the Coaching Coordinator Network. Be sure to follow all of our sponsors currently, that Signature Championship Rings, Modern Football Technology, and Titan GPS. Check out our 10% Toolkit, where we highlight all of our partners and what they have available to you, as well as some special offers. The link to that is in the show notes. Check out our enhanced show notes at coachingcoordinator.com. We'll be adding content that works better on video or as a download. And follow us on X at Coach K. Grabowski.